and welcome to this discussion on the budget organized by the Hindu Center for Politics and Public Policy in association with the Southern India Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I now request Mr. Rafiq Ahmed, President of the Southern India Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to welcome the gathering and introduce the subject.
Mr. Ravi, Mr. Raghav Srinivasan, Mr. N.Ram, Mr. Praveen Chakravarti, Dr. Srinivasan, N.Ram, friends, Mr. Ganapati. It gives me immense pleasure in welcoming you all for this Union Budget 2017, a panel discussion for the first time, the Southern India Chamber of Commerce and Southern India Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the Hindu Center for Political and Public Policy is organizing this meeting jointly. The Union Budget Proposal 2017-18, which is a growth-oriented and defining budget. The budget was presented in Parliament yesterday by the Union Finance Minister, Sri Arun Jaitley. The 2017-18 budget is a path-breaking in various ways, as this is for the first time both railway budget and the general budget dubbed together. SICI agrees with the Honorable Finance Minister the merger of the railway budget. The general budget brings focus on multi-modal approach for development of railways, highways, inland water transport, which was dealt in detail in his speech. The Finance Minister has identified 10 key elements in the budget speech. The budget is focused on fiscal and revenue deficit, and the Finance Minister has to be complimented for keeping the fiscal deficit under check, and at the same time, emphasis has been given to rural development, rural infrastructure, dairy development, etc. Further, the budget has considered all sections of people, senior citizens, youth, and children. For farming sector, SICI is happy to note that many labs for qualified local entrepreneurs to be set up for the soil testing in all 648 Krishi Vigyan Kendras in the country, a step in right direction. We are pleased to note that Honorable Minister has announced the launch of a scheme for labor-intensive leather and footwear sector, similar to the existing one for textiles, to boost as a growth for creation of jobs. The scheme will be in line with the package announced on the textile sector in June last year. I quote, a special scheme for creating employment in the textile sector has already been launched. A similar scheme will be implemented for leather and footwear sector, unquote. In June 2016, government approved 6,000 crores special package for the textile apparel sector to create 1 crore new jobs in 3 years, attracting investment of $11 billion and generating $30 billion in exports. The announcement assumes significance in the Commerce Industry Ministry has suggested incentives for footwear, leather and footwear sector, gives its importance as thrust segment under the Make in India initiative. The tax reduction for MSME is a welcome move and much needed. The reduction of tax rate for individual having taxable slab between 2.5 lakhs and 5 lakhs from 10 to 5%, concession in the housing sector, reduction in number of years of calculating long-term capital gain, etc., are other welcome measures. C welcomes the bold announcement, abolishing the Foreign Investment Promotion Board and new liberalized FDI policy, which is unveiled. Summing up, the SICI welcomes the announcement made in the budget, which is focused on the path-breaking and confident that the same will be implemented and proposed. Today we have among us the experts, the panel members. They will be sharing with us their reaction to this and their expert opinion on that. This will be enlighten us on the fine prints, which is going to reveal us what is really meant for the Finance Minister's idea in the coming 2017-18 budget. We look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you. I once again welcome you all to this panel discussion. Thank you, and I should thank Hindu for joining us along with us to this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The Hindu Center for Politics and Public Policy is pleased to organize this event in association with the Southern India Chamber of Commerce and Industry. This panel discussion on the budget will involve discussions among presentations of the panelists and the moderator for about 1 hour, followed by public interaction and discussion from the audience. Now we have the full panel. The budget presented this year by the Finance Minister, Mr. Arun Jaitley, can be seen from many angles. First, if you take it as a budget for normal times, it has many positives. For instance, containing the fiscal deficit at 3.2% of the GDP. Second, the increase in the allocation for the farm sector substantially. And third, the increase in the allocation for infrastructure also substantially. Then it has two aspects which can be debated. For instance, the merging of the railway budget with the general budget is one. And second, in preparation for the GST, which is scheduled to come into operation in July, the Finance Minister has said he has left the indirect taxes untouched in the budget. The question arises whether he could have done anything preparatory to the introduction of the GST. These are some questions often for debate. And then the third aspect or third angle from which you can look at is, if this is a sound budget for normal times, is the budget good enough for these difficult times? After the November 8th demonetization, the economy has taken a hit, variously estimated at between, the chief economic advisor puts the hit between 0.25 and 0.5%. Other estimates range from 0.5 to even 2%. But whatever it is, the fact that the economic growth has taken a hit. Not that there will be a downslide, but economic growth in the 7 to 7.5% range would have been normal, but it has taken a hit. And whether this budget addresses this question of the dampening effect of the demonetization. And another question arises whether he has done enough for the healthcare sector and the other social sector of education. The question often arises, where would he have found them? And of course, industry has been asking for across the board tax cuts. Whether the finance minister could have done something to boost the so-called animal spirits of industry, boost the investment climate, that is another question open for debate. The question arises, if he is to increase allocations, if he is to have given further tax cuts, where would he find the resources? The finance minister's budget speech itself does provide a clue. He says the Financial FRBM Act, the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, which was reviewed by a committee, advocated that he could perhaps go up to 3.5% of the GDP as fiscal deficit, but now he has stuck to the 3.2 target. whether the extra 0.3% could have been used to probably provide tax cuts or increase allocations to the social sectors is another question that remains. To discuss these and other issues raised by the budget, we have a set of very well-informed panelists. And I start here from my immediate right, Raghavan Srinivasan, editor of Business Line, who will be the moderator. He is a senior business journalist and columnist who has been reporting, analyzing, and interpreting the Indian growth story since the inception of economic reforms in India in 1991. Even prior to the start of reforms, he was one of the pioneers of corporate journalism in India, bringing first-hand experience and insightful reporting on Indian businesses since he switched to journalism after nearly a decade-long stint in marketing in major corporates. An investigative journalist of repute, he has been responsible for breaking major stories like the Harshad Mehta stock scam, the return of Coca-Cola to India, the collapse of UTI, among others. Currently, he is the editor of the Hindu Business Line. And he had earlier worked in the Times of India, the Indian Express, Hindustan Times, Mail Today, Financial Express, and Business Standard. Along with him are the three panelists. To Mr. Raghavan Srinivasan's immediate right, Professor Srinivasan, who is an associate professor of econometrics at the University of Madras and has been in the academic field since 1988. He has served as a teacher in several colleges in the Union Territory of Pondicherry and Tamil Nadu. He was an economist in the Tax Reform and Revenue Augmentation Committee, Government of Tamil Nadu 2002 and 3, and then a member of the State Planning Commission, Government of Tamil Nadu between 2006 and 2011. Since 2008, he has been with the University of Madras. Professor Srinivasan holds a PhD degree in economics. His doctoral thesis was on union financial transfers and horizontal equity in India. He contributes academic articles to journals and popular articles in English and Tamil to newspapers and magazines on issues relating to public finance, education, and regional economics with a focus on Tamil Nadu. To Professor Srinivasan's right is Mr. Praveen Chakravarti, Senior Fellow in Political Economy at the think tank IDFC Institute in Bombay. Mr. Chakravarti spent 2 decades as an investment banker in India and the US. Subsequently, he worked as a consultant with the Unique Identity Authority of India, that is Aadhaar institution, and the National Skills Development Agency during the UPA 2 tenure. He is currently an independent director and advisor on some TVS Group companies. He is also the founding trustee of India's Pen, India's first non-profit data journalism initiative. Mr. Chakravarti is the vice president of the Sri Parthasarathy Swami Sabha in Chennai. He holds an MBA degree from Wharton School of Business and an undergraduate degree from BITS Pilani. He is a prolific writer and has authored articles on issues of economic and financial policies in leading print and digital publications. To Mr. Chakravarti's right is Mr. C.V.S. Krishnakumar, a member of the Taxation Committee of the Southern India Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He is a member of the Institute for Cost and Work Accountants of India and the Institute of Company Secretaries of India. He is in the board of Kone India. He has over 30 years of experience in automobile and other sectors. He has worked in the Indian Railways for 8 years before moving to the corporate world. He was closely associated in the Kone case that went up to the constitutional bench of the Supreme Court. I now leave it to the moderator, Mr. Raghavan Srinivasan, to start the proceedings, start the discussion among the panelists.
Thank you very much. I think Mr. Ravi has admirably set forth the contours of the discussion about the budget. I think we'll start by looking at the fundamental question that you raised. Is this a good budget for normal times or a bad one for difficult times? Which means, first, are we in anything called a normal state at this point of time? Is the economy, not facing challenges out of the ordinary on any fronts? And I'd like the panelists to perhaps first weigh in on that. Before we discuss what Mr. Jaitley did or didn't do, or what he could or couldn't do. All right. So, first of all, given the fact that growth projections for the economy have been reduced downwards by at least a percentage point by most forecasters, from the World Bank to the IMF to even internal forecasts and the survey itself, economic survey itself. The question of normality, and Manmohan Singh, yes, absolutely. The question is, what is normal? Is low growth the new normal? Given the fact that global growth is also projected to grow at the slowest in many years. Global job creation is also supposed to grow at the slowest in many years. Global trade is projected to grow again at a multi-year low. So is low growth the new normal? Professor Srinivasan, would you like to start?
Maybe we have accepted to live in a low growth economy since 2008. And considering usage of words like new normal, it shows that we have taken for granted that we'll have to be in a low growth economy. But what is interesting to look at how the role of state should be in a low growth economy. In 2008, we thought the state should be very proactive in increasing public expenditure as a stimulant and also give some tax concession. On one side, giving tax concession, leaving more money in the private hands for investment and consumption. Of course, public expenditure in terms of higher infrastructural spending and redistributive effects. We will be able to stimulate growth as well as attain distributive justice. But once these things did not work, and accommodative monetary policy around that time also didn't work, then post-2011, once again we went into some sort of austerity measures, tightening monetary policy across the world, getting into a near zero interest rate. Things have not worked till now. So the big question is, what is the role of state in a low-growing economy? We have come one circle full. Now we'll have to raise this question again, whether we'll have to go back to a state that stimulates growth through expenditure, higher deficit in a Keynesian sense. I think one point that we have been missing all over is about the efficiency of government spending itself. It is not alone the quantum of spending, but is also about efficiency of government spending. And most of us would be very uncomfortable in the way that the government spends the money and the impact it creates in the economy, either whether infrastructure facilities are efficiently created or the social expenditure that is being done in terms of schooling and healthcare, or even the minimum government that Adam Smith would expect, that of a minimum state where public administration is the basic necessity, and creating suitable laws, enforcing justice. So we have apprehensions about efficiency of state itself in all these areas, whether you consider a minimum state of Adam Smith or a growing state of Keynes. So we'll have to raise these questions in this context, which is beyond the scope of discussion of budget.
I'm not, still very clear on what your position is. So, since you said that low growth, the usage of the term new normal itself is an acceptance of low growth. So, normal times or extraordinary times? Mr. Chakravarti.
Thank you. Actually, ever since demonetization, we've come to almost expect a shock and awe announcement from the government anytime there is an impending government announcement. And so this expectation of a shock, when it does not come, turns out to be a pleasant surprise. And I think that's kind of what happened with the budget. And then, in the run-up to the budget, there was all kinds of expectations and theories that were floating around, including everything from a banking transaction tax to universal basic income to all. And finally, when nothing happened, we said, oh, great. So apparently boring is the new exciting. And so, sorry.
You're getting some feedback from it.
Oops. If we actually remove that part out and then go back to answering your questions, should we accept low growth? Actually, before demonetization, we were not in a bad shape. So, and the demonetization is an entirely man-made, policy-induced shock, if we can call it that in the economic sense. So I'm not so clear that we have to necessarily accept a world of low growth. Yes, granted, we do have new leaders in developed countries that are threatening global trade and global intercountry trades. But having said all of that, I think we were doing reasonably okay. So in that context, is this a budget that did enough for what should have otherwise been done? And to be clear, let's go through some macroeconomic indicators in terms of to find out where we are. Industry credit is at a multi-decade low. Private investment, the budget acknowledges, is abysmally low. Fixed investment, gross fixed investment is negative. Banking balance sheets and corporate balance sheets are extremely stressed, and we've known that this stress has been there for 3 years now. And there are no jobs that are being created. So this was the macroeconomic backdrop to which we came into the budget. Now to argue that the budget did not give us any shocks, and so we should be happy, is somewhat farcical in my view.
So, since you used the D word, I was planning to get around to it a little later, but demonetization, I think, is the issue of the hour. You also made the point about, the broader indicators of not just the sort of level and strength of economic activity, but also of future expectations. If investments are turning negative, your future expectations are bleak. So, so that's a challenge. The second and larger challenge is, of course, high growth or low growth doesn't really matter unless you actually create some jobs. That's when the impact is felt by a larger part of the population. This was a criticism of the high growth period during the UPA regime, that it was jobless growth. And now, ironically, the Congress's white paper also asked where are the jobs. So the same question is still being asked. We don't have an answer. We didn't get an answer during high growth, and we haven't got an answer during the period of low growth. But what I would like you to look at is that has this budget even attempted to address the impact of demonetization, which was felt perhaps most sharply in the informal sector, and in terms of retail demand. I think these were the two sectors which have felt the sharpest impact of demonetization. Has this budget actually addressed those challenges at all?
So should we? That's right. We are successful. To answer the question, the first instance, any growth is a good growth. Actually, looking at overall how the rest of the world is now moving towards, and has India grown? India growth story continued, and is it possible to continue beyond the limit? See, we also normally talk about top line growing, and then year-on-year expectation, because once a person starts growing, the expectation of, always is that he should continue to grow. But is it possible for us to maintain the momentum of growth over a period of time? One, is the policy framers can continue to bring something to maintain the growth, and any shock coming in between could definitely have a temporary impact on the growth. To look at your question whether the retail, the demonetization impact has been addressed, probably, first of all, everything was kept to be a close guarded secret at that point of time. To make something to adjust and then address it at this point of time could not have happened. But what they said in 50 days, everything will be normal. And now they say by April things will be normal, but we know how to live with normalcy, and this will taper down over a period of time. And definitely this budget has not addressed the specific issue at this stage, but the system has to evolve itself, and I'm sure this growth will happen after a couple of years, but now it's not going to be impacted.
But what about the issue of the larger challenge of stimulating demand? And that's really, I think that's what people, ultimately industry or individuals, they look to the budget to do that. I mean, if you're an individual taxpayer, you look for some relief, and which puts some more spending money in your hands. If your businesses, you again look for elbow room to perhaps grow, to invest for the future. And we definitely did have demand compression. It is being borne out by the early growth numbers post demonetization. It is borne out by plenty of anecdotal evidence from businesses. So there has been demand compression. So how do we get that? Do you think the finance minister had the elbow room to actually have done something about it? Because you must also recognize his limitations. I mean, he was served with a fait accompli in the form of demonetization before he could present his budget. And he has another which is coming a few months after this budget kicks in, which is another game changer, which is the rollout of the GST. So he's caught between a rock and a hard place, right? Having said that, do you think that the finance minister, A, had the fiscal and monetary elbow room to have done something? And if so, what is it that he should have done? Professor Srinivasan?
See, first of all, let us understand or try to make out from the budget what is the vision of the government, particularly the central government, about revival of the economy. It thinks that transferring money from the private hands to the treasury is not fine. Let it be with the private hands. So if you compare the own revenue of the government, putting tax and non-tax all together, the tax revenue GDP ratio has declined from about 9.74% to 9.50%. That means it takes away relatively little amount of money from the public into the treasury. That is one side. But it has to control deficit. So with a declining revenue, to control deficit, then it has to control expenditure to a very large extent, which means the expenditure GDP ratio of the central government this year, it is about 13.26%, and next year it will be about 12.74%. So we have achieved fiscal deficit target of 3.2 from 3.5, mainly through expenditure compression, public expenditure compression. So what do we get out of this? It means that the government wants to put more money in the hands of the private sector so that they would decide better than the government in spending the money and in reviving the economy. So when this being the underlying philosophy of this deficit management, then demands or investment demand or consumption demand, it should grow reacting to the market forces. There is very little for the government to stimulate consumption demand or investment demand in this context. And our long debate whether investment demand is a function of interest rate itself is well settled. It is not related to interest rate alone. It is also related to many other factors. So very little that the monetary policy could do in terms of lowering the repo or lowering the interest rate in the banking system and to revive investment demand. So both these things are left to the private sector to act to the market forces.
Of course, monetary policy's limitations have been exposed over the past, few quarters. And the RBI has been raising the issue of lack of transmission or lack of effective transmission of its signals. So given the other constraints that banks are facing, so policy as a tool to sort of stimulate lending activity in a certain direction is going to have very limited impact. I think that's a new reality. But I would still, this I guess. So if you sort of met your deficit targets primarily by compressing expenditure. By the way, this is not new. This is what every finance minister has done year after year. This is what Chidambaram did very successfully during his stint as the finance minister as well. There was very sharp. There would be, if you looked at the pattern of expenditure as well, that there would be a very sharp compression towards the end of the year, mainly in in expenditure related. You bring the target down, but so which also raises the larger issue of should we worry so much about the fiscal deficit? And I think that brings us back to the first question, which the point which Mr. Ravi raised is that what's so sacred about this 3% or 3.2%? You pointed out that this government appears to have a philosophical objection to spending its way into growth. But the argument given is an economic one. Is that a valid one, Mr. Chakravarti?
The tussle between monetary policy, first let me talk. It's actually, if you read Sebastian Malaby's book on Greenspan, which is an epitome on talks about this tussle between Nixon and Walker, and this has gone on for decades. So I don't think it's new to India. I don't think it's settled, and I think it's a good, healthy tension between the two. The point about what's so sacrosanct about the fiscal deficit, there's only one thing that's sacrosanct about the fiscal deficit, which is this company called Standard & Poor. It's the S&P rating, sovereign rating, that matters a lot to borrowing costs for corporates. And the S&P rating relies largely on fiscal deficit. Now, in the economic survey, the chief economic advisor, Arvind Subramanian, actually had an entire section on how S&P is being unfair to India.
Yeah, there's perception bias.
Yeah. So that alone tells you how important is S&P's perception about India. And hence, fiscal deficit does become important. Now, within the constraints with meeting the fiscal deficit target and the need for some stimulus, I do think there's one place where they could have done something, which is the whole balance sheet problem. And again, the economic survey talks about that. We have 15 lakh crores of bad assets in corporate and bank balance sheets, and that's clogging up the pipe. So when Raghuram Rajan or the RBI talk about monetary policy transmission, or when we are talking about some bank chiefs being put in jail for some loans that they were given, all of this go into how loan decisions are made and whether corporates have the ability to borrow more. So there was a solution that could have been, this could have gotten a lot more attention than some straw man like political funding reforms or anything in the budget. It could have there was a solution that was proposed in the economic survey, create what's colloquially called a bad bank, capitalize it through either sale of public assets or otherwise, transfer these bad assets to this, and free up the balance sheets for both banks and corporates so they can start to borrow, investment can potentially come back, and potentially this can lead to growth. So that was one area where I thought the finance minister could have paid a lot more attention, and this has been festering for 3 years. And I was disappointed that we didn't see much.
Of course, critics of the bad bank idea also point out that, creating a bad bank itself only sort of concentrates your problems instead of solving them, unless you have put the rest of the system in place, because once these assets are transferred, the assumption is that, you would be able to sort of rebuild some of these or recover some of these assets. And we have tried multiple approaches to doing that. We've had asset reconstruction, we've passed the SARFACI Act. So many attempts have been made. None of them are really working. So that's a larger issue behind this. But I do agree that unless the banks get some breathing space on their balance sheet, you're not going to see any significant pickup in lending activity. But coming back to what Mr. Jaitley could or couldn't have done, and if you look at the revenues of the government itself, tax collections have been pretty buoyant. The indications are that they're likely to be even more buoyant. He mentioned in his speech that advanced tax payments on the personal income tax fund have grown by 34% in the last quarter. That's a huge rise. So and they've done fairly well through sale of assets, spectrum auctions, etc. So he had plenty of room to actually, take a few bold spending decisions if he wanted to. But this government appears to have, and this budget appears to have sort of focused its firepower in just a handful of areas where I think it is surer of execution capability. So roads, I think they're fairly confident that, they've sort of cracked the road building problem, railways, and not much else. So, so I want to look further at it. Is this, has this budget actually gone far enough or has been bold enough in terms of, even spending the money that it has at its disposal of the government? So one is the efficiency of spending, which Professor Srinivasan alluded to. The other is actually even the ability to spend, because if you look at the fine print of the budget details, you find that many of the social ministries and schemes have not been able to spend their budget allocation. So capacity to spend is also constrained in some areas. So perhaps that's the reason why the spending focus has been in 2 or 3 select areas. But do you think Mr. Jaitley could have done more? Mr. Krishna Kumar, what do you think?
See, actually, talking about the tax collection perspective, the expenditure depends on the revenue. See, the idea is that government has been looking at tax revenue with the constraint at this point of time whether to look at indirect tax collection. Should he consider all these things, keeping in mind what should be the base on which you should start? Should they look at GST implementation and GST revenue should be taken? If that is the case, how much could have been the incremental increase or even a decrease? They had no clue. Having taken an initial idea that, okay, things will start from April 1st, they should have had their own target, how much will be the collection on account of GST implementation. Thinking of postponing it to July, in government perspective, and in my personal opinion, I'm not sure whether July even is a reasonable target, and by far in another discussion when we were having, we were looking at whether government would be going for even constitutional amendment extended by 1 more year, because the industry may not be gearing up, and now that he's saying by April you will get to know what are the changes, and even the draft laws not coming out properly, they do not know how much will be the tax collection during this year. That's what I could even look at the way in which when the revenue itself is not being fixed, then how to plan for their expenditure. And even this expenditure part, at least government has come to a decision to not to distinguish between planned and non-planned expenditure and combine all these things, at least take this for granted, and even going for different sectors of transportation, be it railways separately spending for it, and then transport, inland transport, all these things, at least they now consolidate and take a call, yes, let us pool it and then spend. And as we know earlier, when they start presenting the budget in March, by that time they start June, July, and allocation comes a bit late, and timing difference was also there. Priority spending was not there, and responsibilities were not there. So what is to be done now is that there should be a clear demarcation of the money, and then there should be a targets clearly made for what they should spend, and then it should be put into productive use. Otherwise, we can see again and again we are going to live with allocation not being spent. Last minute spending will be there. You don't know whether you are really spending for the right cause, but you will be forced to spend. The question what we are saying now will continue to grow. So unless proper planning is there well in advance, like what we are doing in corporates, government has to change. Of course, they are now trying to have their own missions and vision statements. They have to move towards a culture where there should be a time-bound target of spending and time-bound follow-up, and then ensure that it is happening. It should not push to the last. Otherwise, we are going to live with this.
Because, from what I gather is that, yes, the finance minister has done what he could, given the fact that he's really not in a position to tell what he can do. What will be the real state of revenue collection? So, is that? Do you agree with it?
No, I just wanted to add one thing, which is, when we talk about tax collections and tax revenues, the nearly half of the increase in tax revenues this year came from excise and surcharge on petrol products, petrol and diesel. And that was entirely a function of low oil prices. Oil prices are starting to go back up. So I think there is understandable apprehension about where will the revenues come from. So even though the tax revenue growth may look robust, we have to look at where did it come from. And it actually came from these, which economists would call extremely regressive indirect taxes because it hurts the poor far more than it hurts the rich. So if that is not there, and since petroproducts is anyway outside of the GST ambit, then where will tax revenues come from going forward? And if you look at the numbers, the projection is for a 25% growth in personal income tax. Corporate tax is only 8%. So does that mean the government does not expect private investment to kick back in? So then how will personal income tax grow so much? Is it going after all those deposits that have come in after demonetization? So we don't know. There are lots of such questions.
Professor Srinivasan, I would also like you to touch upon an issue which I think you research on, which is transfers and equity. The Prime Minister in his post-budget remarks stressed on this part of the budget, that it is basically aimed at the economically disadvantaged, the socially disadvantaged sections of society. He made it out to be a sort of socialistic budget, if you will. What is your take?
Which government has so far said that we are anti-poor, anti-rural, anti-agriculture? We always say that. So the first point that I made earlier, with a declining expenditure GDP ratio, claiming that we'll spend more on social sector, more on agriculture, it will be morely notional. You see, the public expenditure for the next financial year will increase by 6.6%, which will be as much as the inflation itself. That means the real expenditure will be constant. And if you look at the social sector expenditure, it is supposed to increase by about 16%. And much of it would be on salaries and pensions. So within that, we'll have to see how it can. See, every pie that the government collects has a distributive justice. It has a distributive impact. As Praveen said, that when you collect more money in terms of indirect taxes, which will be more regressive, we do not know from whom we have collected, unlike a direct tax of income or a corporate income tax. Similarly, when you start spending, there are two things that this new government has been telling us since the Finance Commission argued for a case of 42% transfer to the states. Now, if you see from 2015, the gross transfer to the state as a ratio to the gross revenue of the central government, it is constant at 47%. So you have increased share of central taxes for the state, but keeping the gross transfer constant, that means you have reduced other transfers in terms of non-planned grant and planned grant. Now, adding to that, from the next financial year, there is no planning commission, there is no planned transfer. So there are only schematic transfers. Under the planned transfer, 70 to 80% of the planned transfers were based on the Mukherjee formula. So when it is formula based, the state governments get some sort of an untied grant within planned expenditure to be spent on various things. Even now that is taken away. To that extent, you are reducing the discretion of the state governments to spend the planned money. Now that will become a scheme-based transfer. So I don't know why no state has raised any question about doing away with this formula-based transfer for schemes. If you have removed planning commission, then this has to be done. No state has raised this question. Another aspect of it is, if you look at the total transfer other than the share in central taxes, about 20% of the total expenditure of the government of the center will be transferred to the state, because the central government's direct spending ability is very little. All that, particularly in social sector, to a very large extent in the economic sector, whether it is rural development or road or ship or whatever it is in health or education, you will have to spend it through the state government. So they'll have to transfer a larger portion of their own expenditure to the states, and states in turn have to spend them. So this is where the question of efficiency comes. And how do you incentivize them to spend it efficiently? So that becomes essential here. That's what I have been emphasizing right from the beginning, that we always think that states' efficiency is unquestionable. So we'll have to merge that in a context of budget, because there is, for instance, there is no such word called budget in our constitution. We always talk about annual financial statement. So any discussion relating to budget should be restricted to what impact it has got on the revenue and expenditure side of the government. And efficiency has an impact in terms of what is to be delivered. So I am not satisfied with whether it is 11% or 12% of the money that we spent, but how well it is spent. And what is that I realize? And it gets reflected in terms of growth. So this is what we'll have to look at.
Which, brings us back to this thing. And I'm still, I get the feeling that, like I said, after the initial relief of not having bad news, as one of people are beginning to look at some of the finer details and beginning to ask. One of the things which struck me about this budget also was the lack of actually directional change. If you look at certain biases in government spending, they've sort of pretty much stayed unchanged. So if you look at, despite all the talk about education, about skilling and job creation and all that, but if you look at the quantum of change in these sectors, that spending bias against education, healthcare, etc., that really has not significantly changed in this thing. So there has been a positive bias, like I said, in certain other areas, infrastructure spending restricted very specifically to 2 or 3 areas, power, roads and railways. Is that enough? Is that enough to sort of overcome the lack of spending in other areas? Is that enough to also address the larger issues, on the skilling and job front itself? You cannot, what kind of advantage will you be able to take of your demographic dividend if there are no skills and no education within that population which is coming into the labor force? So back to the question, I'm still not getting a clear answer from our panel, so I'm going to try and pin them down a little bit more on it.
I'll tell you one reason being why this government or any government will be more biased towards infrastructure spending. Actually, that gives the leverage for extra budget resources, because many of the infrastructure spending would be done through the public sector undertakings, which would borrow. So it will not get reflected in your budget. So to that extent, you can show a higher amount of expenditure, but that is not inducted into the budget, so your deficit will not grow up. So this is for a state government also. And we expected the FRBM Act would put an end to this also. We wanted the total amount of guarantee by the central government to the public sector borrowing should be limited to about 0.5% of the revenue expenditure. Now, even that is not happening, because if you start investing in some of the finance corporations of the state government, whether it is, so there you will find many of your deposits are not guaranteed by the state itself. So when you want a guarantee, then it has to be restricted to 0.5. If you are ready to take a risk, then the same public sector enterprises would take that loan, and it is basically an unguaranteed loan by the state. So this is why government after government would be interested in spending more on infrastructure, but to answer to their electorates, then they will have to say that I have increased expenditure on education and healthcare, which will be mostly notional. So that is what is essential.
On the issue of jobs, actually the economic survey had an entire chapter again and it identified 2 sectors, textile and leather and footwear. and it actually said the employment elasticity of these two sectors is nearly 100 times that of auto and steel, which is, it has the ability to employ 200 times more people than, say, an auto industry or a steel industry does. So if when jobs is a central challenge, when it's very evident that we're not creating as many jobs, when we know that this is a real a serious crisis that we have on our hands, we need to do more than, I know the opening speaker mentioned, or he quoted that the budget said that they would do more for the leather and footwear industry. But that alone tells you that there was not even a mention of this in the finance minister's speech. But the economic survey clearly says focus on these two sectors. They can generate enough jobs. They can create jobs for you. So you're right. I mean, jobs is a central challenge. I don't know if we have the solutions yet. I know there are various theories about technology and robotics creating a negative shock on job creation. So it is a serious issue. And to answer your question, I don't think the budget did enough to address this challenge.
So Krishna Kumar, I would also like you to take a clear position now on the budget. You started by saying, it's fairly decent. Sort of listening to the arguments for an hour now. So, has this budget done enough?
See, they have identified the areas. For example, let me touch upon this skill development. From last year onwards, the idea of skill development has been talked about. But has it been implemented? Something has been productively done? Is it visible? That is a question. But at least identification part of it, and then try to say what is required is known. But what is skill development? What type of skill to be? For example, let's talk about only affordable housing. Having given that infra priority sector lending, the expectation is going to be so huge in the years to come. Now, do we have Mason? First, fundamentally, it's a requirement of the industry. See, everybody now moving towards engineering, everybody is moving towards ITA, all these things. Do we have other types of skills that have been developed in this country for an economy to grow? That should be a balanced development. So now skill development is identified, but for a geography of this and then the requirement, it is not possible for it to establish. But visibility should be there. And in that context, priorities are identified. Implementation is going to take time. There should be a proper planning for it and then implementation methodologies. This is what I would like to look at it.
Last words, Professor Srinivas.
If I have to describe in a very short phrase, I will say it is a very conservative vote on account. There is very little change.
It's a clean, prudent budget with no funky math to meet deficit targets. But like I said, boring cannot be the new exciting. We needed to do more, and that's where it falls short.
In fact, after listening to the budget, I was telling a friend, after every budget, there used to be something going up, something coming down. After listening to the budget, what happened in the instant case, I said my BP started going up and my pulse started coming down. And whoever is having blood in their body would have also faced the same thing. But I was not ready to comment about those who don't have neither blood nor pulse in their body. That was my feedback. But having said that, the restriction of the finance minister was that, in fact, when almost for 25 years I've been looking at the budget speech, every time we used to, same day we used to send comments of what is the update. But I used to put the last sentence, this is only an update and let me see the fine print tomorrow. Because all the bombshells were only in the fine print. So that became a bit of tiring for us to understand and decipher it over a period. See, today also, at least I attended one session yesterday, it is the second session. Have we understood the budget correctly? And how many are still there in it? And as days go, then there is a lot of things coming out and we do not know whether it is right or wrong. It is too early for us to say at this stage. Having said that, this year budget, when it started, I was wondering, he is not having anything to talk about indirect tax. not touching up indirect tax, what is he going to talk for 2 hours? And direct tax, in that case, he has to give something good or bad. But maybe I'll take a couple of minutes to see, I could see the government's initiative in terms of tax perspective. The rollout towards GST was really visible in their mind. And we were really, really shocked to see, are they really addressing all the issues correctly for the purpose of subsuming all taxes? One interesting point they have addressed, maybe I'm from a multinational company where we have some R&D cess and all that. Now, this is very interesting point that they even took a decision today. They are going to do April or July or September. We do not know when GST is going to come. But government has scrapped the R&D cess, which is 5%, which is going to go to government. I'm not saying government should not take 5%, but it is increasing the cost. End of the day, any businessman is not going to keep cost with him. He's going to pass it on to the end customer. So the move towards implementing all these things, giving effect to that is there in the government. That commitment is there, which I appreciate.
So, good intentions, but insufficient or incomplete execution, perhaps, to sum up. I'd like to take the discussion out to the audience as well. If you have questions that you would like to ask any of the panelists, perhaps we could have a couple of interactions. Yeah.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Somi, and I just have a short question. In the economic survey, it has also been actually mentioned specifically that the long-term investment is being made by the public sector and not by the private sector. In view of that, may I have your view on what do you think was missing to at least create some urge or a move by the private sector to take part in long-term development?
Mr. Krishnakumar, would you like to take that? Question is, what could have been done to encourage the private sector to make longer-term investments?
See, actually, one good thing government has done is that always private sector, when they want to invest in India, or anybody for that matter, be it from overseas investment into India or Indian investment also, the government mechanism is not so free, or it is not permitting all the avenues, because people are ready to invest. But the problem is the government mechanism or machinery is all prohibiting it. In that, government has at least moved one step with respect to liberalization. Even let me take only this scrapping of Foreign Investment Promotion Board. That itself is one of the good decisions they have taken, in the sense that they have understood that over a period after the liberalization in 1991, is FIPB really doing something strong enough to enforce the investment, or should that be monitored? Today, just because they have opened does not mean that anybody can come and invest. They are still keeping the priority sectors like defense and retail and all these things outside. But the fact is, by and large, it is open for investment. So investment climate is reasonably opening up. But the fact is, the confidence building measure should be taken more, so that transparency is there, quick response from the government is there. If that happens over a period, I'm sure the investment from the people will automatically, because looking at the globe as a whole, India is going to grow. Indian growth story is not going to be seen in a different way by anybody else. If they cannot invest in any other part of the world, they have to come here, because both in terms of production, both in terms of consumption, this is going to be the market in the few years to come. And China, though it is growing up, everybody is apprehensive about internal restrictions and all these things. So huge potential is there, but then the framers of law should open up more, and then they should liberalize more, for the purpose that confidence building measures should be taken more.
consultant and activist in many forums. The general question to the panel is, do you think because of the coming elections and past the midterm, probably the government has taken a wait-and-see attitude and then, as you said, it's a statement of accounts and governed by shock treatment later? Probably just before the elections due in 18. So maybe there will be a lot of concessions coming next year. That's one question. Secondly, I'm a bit surprised that 25 years since liberalization, why are we still stuck with growth as the only measure of economic activity? When you look at the demographic dividend, the inequalities, and the much talked about potential for growth and population, I think there must be other measures to measure economically where the trickle down is actually happening. I think in India we are missing that opportunity by copying Western capitalism. I'm saying economists like you must be able to develop different kinds of measurement norms instead of talking about growth as the only elixir. Thank you.
So, Praveen, would you take the first part of the question?
Or I thought I'll take the second then. Okay. Actually, Vivek Debroy has an interesting piece in the Indian Express today on that, which is about should GDP be the only measure? The real, this has been a subject of debate. I mean, French President François Hollande, Nicolas Sarkozy actually had a committee set up under Dr. Amartya Sen to study this exact precise question that you're asking. Should a country's development be measured only by GDP? The only real answer to that is, the answer is no, but there is no other alternative to measure a country's development other than GDP. So in some sense, it's kind of like what Churchill said about democracy. It's the worst form of government except for all other forms. So in that sense, I think it's a question that's been asked, but we don't have another answer to it.
Yeah. I'll just perhaps chip in on the question you asked about politics, impacting the budget. I think that that varies from, government to government. This particular administration, it is very clear that all the political messaging will be done by the Prime Minister. Nobody else is going to be sending any political messages, positive, negative, doesn't matter. So clearly those kind of messages would be done by the Prime Minister, and they would be done off budget at a timing suitable to him. We had a whole raft of announcements aimed at, say, the so-called populist vote bank. Just before the budget, it was made by the Prime Minister. Demonetization was announced by the Prime Minister. So I think that, and also the fact is that there was an absence of politics in this budget, in the sense that there are very critical elections happening as we speak in Uttar Pradesh and Punjab. Nevertheless, the budget very clearly refrained from even fudging in that direction. So I think with this administration, politics is going to be separated from the budget, because unless the Prime Minister becomes the Finance Minister as well. So.
Sir, I am Joseph Durai from the academic field. So now we are living in the era of globalization, which has widened the inequality. And now, other aspect is nationalism has taken over, that is protectionism. So in this context, again, we are talking about growth rates only, which he has also highlighted. So the growth rate, higher growth rate, should not be talked about. This growth rate, as a panelist said, there is no other criteria to measure. But we have evidence from our Indian context that lower growth rate has given us higher employment also. And why this is not being touched upon, and why only higher growth rate is being talked about in the budget or over any discussion. this is the first point I would like to ask. Secondly, this trickle-down effect of reducing poverty through growth has not given the desired result. For example, previously we were talking about poverty in terms of calories intake, that is food intake, but now we have moved towards quality of life. So in this context, why education and health are not being addressed in the budget? And the third aspect is on at the macro level. When there is growing increase in disparities or widening of income inequality, why again, how do we expect our consumption to grow? So as a panelist already highlighted, so increase in income at the lower level will lead to an increase in consumption. So without increase in income, there cannot be increase in demand and investment cannot take place. So again, there is a strategic mistake on our part in concentrating on growth rate itself. And the second question is, both the panelists addressed about inefficiency. I think Professor Srinivasan addressed about inefficiency of government. And another panelist addressed about inefficiency of corporate sector. So it is an entire social problem. So inefficiency is not only in the private sector, not only in the government sector, but also in the private sector.
So do you have a specific question
yeah.
related to that? Yeah.
So where is this wealth going? Is the economists at the panel discussions are going discussing this aspect also? Where is the policy towards this in this budget? Because we are speaking in the context of demonetization. So demonetization alone is not going to address this problem. So what happens to the entire regulations, entire laws? Are they being followed? Are they being enforced? This is my question. Thank you.
So let me look at the larger, if I were to sort of bring together a common strand from this, I think perhaps what you wish to ask is, has this budget done enough to address the question of poverty, of lifting the quality of life of the poorest sections of society? Am I sort of correct in interpreting it that way? Professor Srinivasan?
See, looking at central government budget alone in addressing issues of poverty or agriculture or rural development is very partial, because in these sectors nearly 60 to 70% of the money is being spent by the state governments, and the central government contribution is relatively less. It can only give directions, and often we are told that private agriculture is a private sector which provides the largest employment in the country. Next only comes textile. But once again, we'll have to see this agriculture as a sector. It is surrounded only by the public, whether in terms of determining the input prices of fertilizer or power, or in terms of determining the output prices in terms of minimum support price. This entire agriculture, though it is a private initiative, it is largely controlled by the public sector, and to a very large extent of the public money that is being spent both by the center and the state. So in spite of about 60 years of spending money on this sector, still the growth is limping and it is highly fluctuating. Still the sector is not insulated from the monsoon. And attended to this is the rural poverty issue. So we have tried with so many strategies. In 50s and 60s, we thought public expenditure will trickle down to the poor. It did not happen. In 70s, we started with this IRDP, Integrated Rural Development Program, a large giveaways to rural people in terms of giving them cows, sheep, goat, whatever it is. But ultimately, they did not live them to give them any employment and income. Then we started giving them direct employment, which was now been converted into the 100 days employment guarantee scheme. It is a combination of food for work program and many such programs in the rural areas we have done. Similarly, we expanded PDS. In states like Tamil Nadu, we give it free, particularly rice. So we have experimented with many schemes in terms of providing employment, particularly for the rural folk, in terms of providing some social security in terms of food, old age pension, or that of maternity benefits, so on and so forth. But we have isolated studies that question once again whether it reaches the targeted population. There are arguments on either side that universal provision of PDS is essential because the really needy will not be left out. But the other side of the argument would be an universalization of any such scheme would include the rich as well. So untargeted subsidies will go away. So India is a country which is very rich with issues relating to addressing inequality. And we have done it time and again. We are still experimenting. Only problem is we have not crystallized on how our strategy to address issues of distributive justice should be done. Unemployment is an unknown animal for us. We do not know how to create unemployment, how to solve this problem. Till about 70s, we thought only public sector could solve this. And left and right, we have enhanced public administration, we have expanded public sector units, ultimately to realize in 1980s that these units and these public administrative systems are taking away the precious public money. Then once again, since mid of 80s, we started privatizing, allowing more private sector in places where the public sector already exists, or to an extent of privatizing the public sector itself. Now we talk about growth without employment. So there are issues of this variety which cannot be fixed even in a short run. It would require a real basic change in the system itself, which is beyond, I think, that could be addressed in terms of revenue and expenses. That too only half of the government, the union government, because another half is another 29 state governments.
Okay, last couple of questions. From that side, please. Right at the back, the lady at the back. Yeah. All right. Okay, we'll come to you next.
Namaskaram. I am Ramesh from the Rajaji Center for Public Affairs. I realize that the entire world economy is tottering under the so-called Hindu rate of growth, about which we have been accused of during the bad old days. And now, strangely, we find that our economy and to some extent Chinese economy are well above the so-called Hindu rate of growth. When that be the case, the union budget apart, is there not a silver lining happening by means of the sheer fact that all other advanced countries are all much, much, much below our own run rate, and we are substantially above their own growth rates, as we are able to see it from the various news reports. The views from the columnists and the panelists will be appreciated on this, the Hindu rate of growth, which we were accused of at one point of time. Thank you.
So in other words, are things as bad as they seem, or are they as bad as they're made out in the media? I think that's the question. Praveen.
First, I must acknowledge I don't necessarily like the term the Hindu rate of growth as a negative, in a negative connotation. But having said that, no, this is a point that's been kind of talked about, which is, okay, we're probably one or two of the shining stars in the world in terms of economic. It goes back to an earlier question about GDP growth. Despite all of this growth, we must realize 2 out of every 3 Indians is either poor or is jobless or both. That is the harsh reality that we have to confront. So we can, take pride, and I'm not saying we should not be proud of the fact that we are growing. We're still growing about 5-6% in a year, but it goes back to the quality of growth. Is this really achieving what Professor Srinivasan said, distributive justice and all kinds of other issues? So to that extent, I would caution us from getting carried away.
Hi, good morning. I'm Vasundhara from the Hindu Center. Mr. Moderator, earlier you said that the budget wasn't very political. However, there is a provision in the new budget that limits campaign contributions to about rupees 2,000. I was wondering if the panelists could comment on the limitations that have been set on individual contributions and how this is going to clean up electoral finance. And also, do you think that this paves the way to the setting up of PACs or super PACs in India? Thank you.
So actually, political funding has been there in this country in some form or the other over the period. They wanted to give some color to it, and then when corporates were forced to pay, they were not in a position to pay. They were forced to pay, in other words, and with the code of conduct across, everybody was talking about we will not do, but still they wanted to do. They were asked to do. In that case, Companies Act was amended to include that. It gave a color. In all the ways, they tried to do it in one form or the other. But receipt, political parties were not ready to accept, and they do not know what purpose they are spending, how they are spending. Now, talking about reducing it to 2,000 rupees, it is something all of us know pretty well. It's not going to work out in the long run. But will political parties account properly? Will they file the returns? Will they show the source? And will people be ready to say that, yes, we are funding for it? It's going to be a big problem, and nobody will be openly coming and saying, yes, I gave it to this party, unless, unlike in the some developed countries, India has to go up a lot over a period. But this is the right step in the sense that in the books, at least, we are saying that there will not be any funding that will happen unaccounted.
I think, it's laudable to the extent that it has been addressed and this was taken up. Should it have necessarily been in the budget? Was it just a straw man in the budget to deflect tension? We don't know about that. In terms of your question about will India go the PAC and the super PAC way, I don't think so, and I hope not.
Simply lowering the limit for cash contributions to political parties does not necessarily mean that you're going to have, more greater transparency. Just the number of anonymous contributors will increase. Mayawati has declared, and paid taxes on money which is simply been given by her fans and admirers. So, that does not necessarily lead to additional, transparency in this thing. I think, and one of the issues of corporate funding of political parties has always been this, that elections can lead to contrary results, and corporates are, understandably worried about, getting caught out having supported the wrong party, right? And that's one of the reasons why everybody is happy with a lack of a very clear audit trail. So I wonder how much that situation is going to change. But as Praveen said, I think a beginning at least has been made, and a willingness has been shown to at least address the issue, itself. I think that's the beginning. It's been brought into the area of public debate, and I'm sure that over time perhaps we might see some actual progress on that front. Yeah. Yes, sir. At the back. Yes.
Good morning, sir. My name is M.A. Martin. I was working with Tata Steel at Jamshedpur in the Public Relations Department earlier. And now I'm retired. I come back to Madras, my hometown. Now, coming back to Mr. Srinivasan's point, where he said rural development is not possible, you'll have to come to Jamshedpur to have a look at all the rural development activities we have from Tata Steel end. And it goes down, it percolates down to the people who are in the rural folk. And therefore, we have no mafias, no Naxals problems with us at all. They receive us all totally because it is percolating down to the bottom half. Now, coming back to the question of unemployment, the other day, 2 days back, I was traveling from N.Ram to Madras on the N.Ram Madras mail. It is supposed to be the new rake, which is supposed to be, some German technology. But on that, the toilets were horrible, terrible. Fortunately, I took a sleeper class, ticket, and I was traveling on the sleeper class. And regarding the unemployment issue, we only pay a maximum of 500 rupees per day to an individual. Why don't we, make all this unemployed youth get into all this business who are willing to be at the toilet ends to clean up the toilets on the trains? That's one small example. Because we in India have this barrier of not cleaning the toilets. But when we go out of India, we are the best in the world. So therefore, with all our diversities and all this caste, creed, and problems, we are a United States of India rather than an India per se. So I think, small things. We have a lot of vacancies on the road. We have no signals on the road. We need a lot of policemen on the road, policemen and women. Why don't we have employment there? These are all small issues which the government should think. It is not the public who should think. Then, just going one overnight and demonetizing. I had a problem, personal problem. I had a debt in the family. I didn't have money. Who cares? Does the Prime Minister care? And I was traveling on that night with the money I had from the ATM, and it was all 1,000 rupees. And the bus conductor refused to give me a ticket at Kerala because it was announced at 8 o'clock. These are small issues which trickles down and percolates down to the lower man and a common man. So if we think, out of the box, we can create employment. We have a lot of people unemployed. As you rightly said, it is unemployment and the rural thing. Why should we stick to the water problem all this while? See, on one side we say the Himalayas are melting down and the seas are going up. We have examples in Arab countries where they don't have a drop of water. They desalinate the entire ocean for their drinking water. Why don't we have technologies which is God-given, use the technology of desalinating the water, and reduce the water from the sea, use it for our uses, rather than depending on Karnataka or Andhra or anyone. And we have minerals added to it to cultivate our crops. So it's a shame that we are crying for water from here and there, begging for water. It's all politics. It trickles down to politics. So if we think radically, we we should, think out of the box and we get the answers.
Thank you. Thank you. So, okay, certain very large issues, I think, some certainly well beyond the scope of any budget. But on cleanliness, yes, a very important point. I think the Prime Minister realizes it. His pet project is the Swachh Bharat mission. The question is, are the outcomes being measured correctly? Do you measure Swachh Bharat outcomes by counting the number of toilets or by actually auditing behavioral change in society? So that's a point there. But, you also touched upon the railways, and actually that's interesting because we sort of skipped over one of the most significant reforms in this particular budget, which was actually the merger of the railway budget with the general budget. From an national accounting perspective, is this a good thing or a bad thing? That this whole thing gets merged into the executive.
See, actually, in the olden days when railways was formed, and then I understand that from 1924 onwards we had a separate budget for railways, and railways was considered to be a separate behemoth by itself, looking at it, and then it was administered in a different way. And I feel there was a separate budget, so they wanted to introduce something, they wanted to increase some rates, reduce some rates. Over a period, it was administered in its own way. But when the economy is growing and then different forms of transportation also comes in, be it surface transport, be it railways, be it waterways, be it airport. And if you're going to spend four different ministries, 4 different funds, and everybody will be looking at their own priorities. If I look at one way of transportation as an issue and then merge all these things and have a corpus that is available with me, it will be possible for me to appropriate this money within the 4 different modes of transport, so that it will be difficult definitely for all the 4 to be brought under one roof and everybody will have their own priorities. But still, if there is an administrator who understands the need of the country and then try to earmark this money, route it in the right way, then I'm sure this move is really a welcome move. Of course, we are losing the age-old practice of saying that at least is there a separate train coming to our state or our native place or things like that. And even yesterday they were mentioning in one of the reviews that Jafar Sharif had a separate train going to Bangalore only for him. So if ministers are going to think in those lines, not taking the interest of the country, then any amount of budget is not going to be useful. So this is a right move. At least we see everything under one roof.
Sir, I would like to know that investors are interested in knowing what is the interest is going to be paid by NBFCs, housing finance corporations, and infrastructure developments investments. What will be the gestation periods? Nothing has been specified in the budget, and I think the economists and journalists will also focus on this, so that more investors will come. And moreover, the natural calamities have taken places in almost all the places. But whether the infrastructure development is going to be only with Chennai, Bangalore, or Delhi, or Calcutta only, or it is going to be in other rural places and backward areas also. The government, so far, for the last 5 years, no government has done anything about the backward areas, developing the industries, etc. So, I think we should focus to the government about this point also.
I didn't see a clear question there, so we'll take your observations on board.
Good morning. My name is Venkat. My question is to Mr. Praveen Chakravarti. You made a statement saying boring can no longer be exciting. Now, can you spell out a few specific points that you would have done to make it more exciting, which Arun Jaitley has not done, and 2 or 3 points which you would not have done, which he has done, to make it less disappointing?
No, I think I talked about it. I think the big elephant in the room was the balance sheet problem and how we could have solved it by creating some sort of a solution. I mean, a bad bank is one idea that has clearly come from the government itself. So that required creation of an institution, of a new institution, and allocating funds for it, and actually coming up with policies and rules and regulations about how do you transfer assets, how do you price them, and how do you create incentives. So that could have been actually a big, bold move in my view, which could have actually solved the problem of, or at least attempted to solve the problem of balance sheets, which then had a big impact. So that was certainly one thing that I've already talked about. Not in the budget. There was 10,000 crores allocated to balance sheet problems, and that was it.
Good morning, sir. My name is Vedant, and I'm an economics student. When we spoke about out-of-the-box ideas, my question to you is, when we look at, there's no emphasis ever since the budget started on sports infrastructure. Why is there no emphasis on sports infrastructure? Because so if you see badminton, where there was no infrastructure a few years back, but now there's infrastructure, and because of that, the PBL finals was watched by a record number of people. Now if there's infrastructure, what will happen because of infrastructure is it'll create more employment through Manrega. So once there's employment, it'll automatically improve our economy. Another example is in France, when they hosted the Euros in 2016. It helped in helping the economy of France. But why, if the infrastructure regarding sports in India is good, India will be respected in terms of all sports, and what will happen is India will host the particular World Cups or particular games, which will indirectly help improve our economy. For example, in Chennai Open, my last example, Chennai Open, when we see, when Rafael Nadal came in 2009, it was full. But since India does not have a very good singles tennis player, it resulted in nobody attending Chennai Open. The crowd was not that full. Why do you think the government does not put emphasis on sports infrastructure?
No, is the argument that that's not being, it's not enough is being done? I mean, one is it's a concurrent subject. Sure. So, I mean, cricket's a private, and apparently it's not been running well according to the Supreme Court. But sure. So.
No, actually, one of the expenses of the central government, I think if I remember right, it is somewhere around 8,000 crore allocated for arts, culture and sports, this particular three divisions alone. And see, the problem in sports administration is the infrastructure facilities that are being created will have to be continuously used. For instance, even Tamil Nadu actually, we experimented with creating a sports complex in every district headquarters. That means we have about 30 sports complex now in the state. But the limited use that it has as on today, if you go to any such sports complex, it is only used for morning and evening walk. Because maintaining that infrastructure itself is hugely costly. And we don't collect any user charge for that. And we obviously we cannot from children. So some way of financing sports itself requires some sort of a public-private partnership, which alone could answer this question.
I think somebody had tweeted just after the budget that 70% of Mr. Jaitley's speech was related to the state list, so it was a complete waste of time because he can't do anything about it. He's just talking about it. Sports Yes, I mean, it is something which is in the concurrent list, and in terms of it comes down to prioritization, and what is a sellable priority in the long run to potential voters. I mean, that's how policy decisions are taken in an electoral democracy. Spending on sport is still not, I think, electorally considered to be that saleable an item. So, if that happens, if you can win an election because you built a great stadium, I think you'll see more stadiums being built. Short answer. Yes, please. Yes. There's a lady here who's been raising. Sam? Yeah.
Thank you. This is Samata. Some part of raising my hands to look at smaller panelists also reflects to me the economic. Okay, I had two questions. One was from Mr. Praveen and one was from Mr. Srinivasan. The first one was so we've sort of discussed that there is no political angle to the budget, but I have the fear that actually the sort of budgetary allocations to roads and also the emphasis on power and steel could be seen as this idea that India should be a capitalist or look at USA. Somebody even mentioned United States of India, So I have a fear that the politics of the government is such that it sees a certain model of India. And I'm wondering if the reason that we didn't look at more jobs in the textile or whatever sector over steel sector could be a reflection of that politics. So I would like you to, my question for Mr. Srinivasan was this idea that the government is not looking so much at revenue growth and it's sort of letting the market forces play. This is for me totally opposite to what I think of demonetization. It seems to me that the government wants central control, wants to increase tax revenues, maybe from personal incomes, and so I don't see it as benign at all and a pro-market forces. I see it, in fact, quite opposite and negative for business sentiment. So can you talk more on that? Thank you.
One of the offshoots of demonetization, they said you would be able to collect more tax money because more transactions will be in the accounts, so unaccounted transactions will be less. Even accounting for, actually, after demonetization was announced, for the first 3 weeks, I think, the government accepted tax money in terms of the demonetized 500 and 1,000 rupee notes. And many of the local governments actually had more money then. It was also reported in the newspaper. So it is an offshoot of that, but not an intended offshoot, I think. The general notion of the government in India today, or for the last two and a half decades, is that we should allow for a non-interfering tax system. Or I would put it like this, a market-preserving tax system, which will not distort the market in any way, even at the cost of declining revenue, so that the market should function and that should enable higher employment and output. So this has been the notion of the government for the last 2.5 decades. So they are not very much bothered about whether they lose money or not, but unless under certain compulsions in certain specific periods. So I don't think demonetization was done with the sole aim of taking more tax money. Maybe it is one of the arguments that they have put so that you would accept that. Because whenever we say that we will get more tax money, then we are happy that government would spend more. And obviously, most of us, at least when only 3% of us pay income tax, remaining 97 would have been very happy. Okay, during demonetization, the other 3% will have to pay higher amount of tax. So it is going to be their nightmare, not mine. Of course, I undergo some hardship in the short term. So this is the idea that they sold to us. I don't think, I personally did not take that idea.
I think if your question about steel versus textile is more on, I wouldn't go as far to say one is capitalist and the other is something else. I think it's largely the notion of trickle down versus, generally we feel that if you build roads, that there is a large trickle down effect in terms of cement production, sand and steel and all of that. Now, it is arguable whether it is indeed true or not. That's a separate discussion. But so that's perhaps why in most economies, roads and big industrial projects get the attention that it does. Does it get undue attention? If that's your question, I don't necessarily have a view on it.
I'm Mohan from Tamil Nadu Small Industries Association. See, the whole budget is talking about infrastructure, employment, rural development, all these things. But every finance minister so far, all other platforms, they talk about MSMEs. They are the backbone of the industry. GDP growth is so much a percentage. The export growth is so much because of the MSMEs. And even in tax paying, I tell you, most of the people who are enjoying facilities with the bank, they have to file the returns. So naturally, the contribution to us, even the IT, is from the small and micro and medium industries. In that is the case, in the whole of budget speech, you can not see anywhere regarding MSME, what is the government's role, how it is, because that is the major employment generation area where small industries only can give employment, not the corporates. In that situation, no mention about MSMEs and any remedial measures what the industry is undergoing. I don't think the government is aware, trying to understand and do something about it. Panelists can throw some light on that?
See, the very focus of MSME has been there for a little. I disagree with you that they are not addressing it. In fact, I'm also from a large industry, and the way in which we are looking at the treatment given to MSME is really focused at this point. In fact, I was about to touch upon the same point. When the income tax 2-3 years back, when they tried to say that they are going to bring down the income tax rate, at that time they never thought about giving the priority for MSME. So what they tried to say was that Indian tax rate is on the higher side. The corporate tax rate will be brought down from 30 to 25. So at that time, the intention is not looking at who should be given a priority treatment and who should be kept out of it. It was a holistic approach of the country as a whole. Now in this budget, surprisingly, when we saw that, as I was mentioning earlier, I was seeing as to what exactly the finance minister is going to do in the indirect tax front. He has slashed it from 30 to 25. So whether it is going to be beneficial to how much the tax that an individual industry is going to save is something different. But the statistics is talking about is 96% of the taxpayers are MSME and they're going to come out of it. Which means the intention is not to favor the numbers, unlike what it was intended 2 years back. It was with the intention of bringing the overall tax rate down, but not to give a treatment for different industries. Now, if he has taken that as a bold step in this budget and said openly that in spite of the fact that I'm not going to look at, there's not going to be any change in the indirect tax revenue because that's going to be kept out of the budget. In direct tax revenue, in fact, I could say the finance minister has done a divide and rule policy in the sense that he put a surcharge on more than 1 crore a few years back. At that time, people thought only people earning more than 1 crore will be paying a surcharge. Why am I bothered? Now what he did was that he reduced a small amount for the small salary structure and then said, he brought the in between 50 lakhs to 1 crore into surcharge. At that time they said, okay, more than 1 crore is now thinking, I was paying, you also pay. Now more than 50 lakhs is now thinking, okay, at that time I did not support, I am the person who is good. So what I mean to say is that, though he has punished all the other people and probably he gave the reduction for the lower end by robbing from the middle income from 50 lakhs to 1 crore. That's sorry to say the word. But what I mean to say is that in spite of all these things, he has extended 5% slashing from 30 to 25 at one go. See, he could have done one thing for the large corporates also, like sales tax when it was reduced from CST from 4% to 2%. Year on year, there was a roadmap that they will be bringing down 4 to 3, 3 to 2, 2 to 1. Though they did not bring it down to 1. But at least it was moving towards from 4 to 1. Even overall in, corporate tax rate could have been brought down from 30 to 29 slowly for everybody. When he gave for MSME straight 5% reduction, it should be taken as if it's a positive step towards MSME. So, and even the interest part, if there is a delay that is being done from bigger corporates to MSMEs, we are paying a deduction of that interest part and paying tax to government. It is probably, we could have paid interest back to MSMEs, that one part. It is not that we don't want to pay. But the punishment government is already giving for bigger industries if they are not supporting the smaller industries. So, in both front, in terms of giving financial assistance from bigger industry to MSME, point number one. In this specific budget of drastically reducing from 30 to 25% at one go, that's a welcome move.
I think also the Mudra scheme. So, it would be incorrect. There are certain things which a finance minister or a budget cannot do. He cannot address the inherent competitive challenges that the MSME sector faces. He cannot change your lack of scale. He cannot address your technology issues, competitiveness issues, market access issues, right? He can, and I think what he can do and what he has done is to try and address those things which are under policy control. So there is, on the finance side, there has been this thing. On taxes, as it has been pointed out, there's been a substantial. So I think, in fact, I would say that this is the first time that the MSME sector has been given, I would say, a fair bit of policy attention in a budget, and I think that's a good thing. But some of the other things are really beyond the finance minister's ambit to solve. So that we'll have to look elsewhere for solutions. I think we will sort of, wind up at this point. We are sort of running out of the time that we have at our disposal. I would like to thank all my fellow panelists for a very, very interesting and engaging discussion, and the audience for the number of interesting questions they posed. Thank you very much.